Morning, everybody. The Simple Handicap for Thursday, October 24th. Thank you for making me a part of your morning. NFL week number 8 is officially here. Appreciate everybody who took the time yesterday to stop by the preview live stream on the YouTube channel. If you're watching on the YouTube channel this morning, very good morning to you, as to everybody listening on Apple or Spotify as well. Lots to talk about, a lot of games to get to. Let's get into it. Market rundown for this Thursday. Minnesota and LA tonight. Vikings, heard me say it a lot, sounding like a broken record. Still a 3-point favorite. We're seeing even money. We're seeing up to minus 110. It's a back and forth market, as it has been the entire week. Total in this game is 48. For those of you who enjoy this type of commentary, I would anticipate today, when you're scrolling through the Twitter feed, you're scrolling through the Facebook feed, the TikTok feed, whatever you're on, this is probably going to be described as the biggest pros versus Joes decision of the entire year from the commentary crew that covers how betting is going at sportsbooks. I think you're going to see some pretty crazy numbers and percentages thrown around this game. It is going to be one of those decisions where a lot of pro money supporting the Rams, everybody else is on the Vikings, and you have a big split for a primetime game, and that is going to open up a ton of commentary in-game as well as this game progresses into the fourth quarter. The Rams in a bit of a desperate spot at home, needing the win. The Vikings coming off of the Lions game, which there's that trend and how teams have played the Lions and struggled, which has been referenced a million times on programs. And there's a defense that can give Stafford trouble, who struggled under pressure, but now Cooper Kupp is back. We're waiting to see if TJ Hawkinson is going to be able to play in this game as well. I think that's the last story to really talk about in this game. He's been limited in the participation element all week. Typically, coming off of IR, you get a full practice in on the practice report before you start. I think that's maybe a bit of a damning expectation on his possibility for playing tonight. If he does go and he hasn't had the full, you probably see him on a pretty aggressive snap count, I would expect. But that's what stood out to me in regards to that injury. I would be very surprised if Puka Nakua's out there despite being at practice. Same boat for him. We will see Cooper Kupp back, who is going to be playing in this game, which is a boost for the LA Rams. So with all that said, this is what it is. I mean, we've been back from 3 minus 10 to 3 minus 20 the entire week. That's where we're sitting at. That's what we're looking at. That's where we're going to go. If you see this number come off of the 3, I think that is going to be very telling. And if it does, I'll be curious to see how long it ends up holding. As I talked about a lot, would have loved to find myself on the Rams in this game. I was never interested in betting the Vikings, just didn't get the number. Last note here is that Cashman, the best run-stopping defender on the defensive side for the Vikings, has been ruled out. Let's get to Sunday. Tennessee on the road at the Detroit Lions. Lions 11.5-point favorites. Total in this game, 45, shaded to the under. Big news here yesterday morning, bright and early, 5 a.m. The phone goes off. DeAndre Hopkins, gone to Kansas City. He is out of Tennessee. And there were comments from Calvin Ridley yesterday, which, I mean, continue on with the Ridley commentary that we have been seeing the entire season, that start to make you wonder what exactly is going on. And I know some of those were curated around, but I mean, you just have a now wide receiver in Tennessee that's, I don't know what's going on in that locker room. And this looks like it could be trending towards a Mason Rudolph game. Have not got an official rule yet from Brian Callahan, but that's how it's looking. That's a blow to the Titans offense any way that you look at it in this game. That certainly more than offsets the loss of Williams for the Lions laying this big of a number. We are seeing this settle in at 11.5. The big Hopkins impact was on the total, which came down a little bit. Baltimore on the road at the Cleveland Browns. Ravens 9-point favorites across the board. Total in this game 44.5. There was good news for the Cleveland Browns, who have Wyatt Teller back at practice too. So it seems like a bit of a long shot. There is a chance that the entire starting offensive line that was expected in week 1 for Cleveland could be back on the field. You're going to get 4 or 5 guys, potentially 5 of 5, although it seems like a long shot. Jameis Winston confirmed as the starting quarterback as expected. This is as healthy and ready of a Browns team as we have seen really all season with the QB upgrade that folks are anticipating. This number is holding steady at 9 with 8.5 showing at DraftKings on the board. Green Bay on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. 4.5s for Green Bay were taken out. We are now down to a flat 4 in this game as we hit possibly peak Green Bay pricing. Multiple injuries on the Packers report on both sides. Mostly limitations in terms of practice. Jalen Reed, Christian Watson, Josh Myers at center, Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, who's been out of the lineup, Quay Walker, Jair Alexander, and Keyshawn Nixon. So a lot of names popped up. That collection of names enough to get a half-point move here on the Jags coming in. I think we'll see the majority of those guys back participating today, and we'll have to continue to watch that report, but it's not something that I'm looking at as being an overly concerning sign at the moment. Indy on the road at the Houston Texans. More Indy money yesterday. 5.5s were taken out. 5s were mostly taken out. We're seeing 5 at Chris, 4.5 at Circa, 4.5 at Pinnacle. Those numbers continue to trend down as low as 45.5 on the total. Good news for the Colts with Jonathan Taylor back at practice. Good news for the Colts with DeForest Buckner back at practice. Both of those guys could be good to go in this game. We're still looking at a Houston Texans defense with at least 4 starters in jeopardy for missing this game. You're also seeing Will Anderson and Fatou Kassi on the injury report popping up early in the week as well. So there is continued concerns with Houston as Indy money trickles into this market as the limits go up yesterday on Wednesday. Arizona on the road at the Miami Dolphins. This was the game I gave out as my favorite of the week on the live stream preview yesterday on Miami at home. The Arizona Cardinals, the one injury I'm very curious about is Sean Murphy-Bunting. They went and lost another linebacker in the Monday Night Football game and get Dennis Gardeck. For the Miami Dolphins, Tua is back. He's practicing. And the way that the team was talking about the practice with him back on the field yesterday, I think is pretty optimistic. Tyreek Hill is telling guys to add him to his fantasy team. There's commentary about how the ball was moving around. Reporters covering the team and watching the practice says it's the best that they have looked in practice since the preseason, and they get a very favorable matchup against this Cardinals defense. Think it's a great spot for the Dolphins at home this week. Atlanta on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We know the Buccaneers' injury situation. It's grim. It's not good. It's a big move. I will say I'm liking the dog here in Tampa Bay getting 2.5 at home despite the injuries against the Atlanta Falcons in this spot. I think it's a game we can talk about a little bit more to wrap up tomorrow on the podcast. And I say that because Chicago and Washington, the next game up, it's been an interesting game for movement yesterday. We saw a pro release and send out Washington money line as we talked about on the pod yesterday. Reached out. I was like, what's going on? What are you thinking here? Didn't get a clear-cut response back. The only justification I could have seen for that was that there was expectation that perhaps Jaden Daniels would miss. I don't think anybody knew at the time, but you get speculation from that. And as it turns out, Jaden Daniels was not at practice, has the week-to-week designation. My sense the whole week has been he's less likely to play than likely. Heard Brian Baldinger on the show with Nick Costos talking about rib injuries and how you can't speed up the healing. You've seen some Twitter doctors come out and say it's probably less likely he plays this week than plays. As this all kind of came out over an hour span yesterday, the 1s and 1.5s went back to 2.5, and now it's 2.5 minus 20 where we're looking. So if you get officially Daniels out, this does probably go to 3, and then there becomes a decision. And the decision is going to probably be based around what is going on in the Bears secondary. Jaquan Brisker, Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon, and Terrell Smith. 3 starters in the secondary, 1 backup at the same position where Stevenson is injured. The Bears secondary has been impressive the entire season. It's been a solid defense. If you all of a sudden start removing multiple starters, that's a big blow out of the bye. The fact that they're not back at practice in full, I think, leaves some reason for concern with the Bears defense, which if Marcus Mariota is starting and you see this move push up a little bit, that becomes a different handicap at that stage. So keep an eye on that Bears practice report. As much as the Daniels-Mariota stuff is going to matter, kind of looking at that mostly priced in at this point, where the Bears injuries are probably from this point forward going to be the more impactful spot to look at betting around, especially if Daniels is ruled out, and this does end up going to 3. New York Jets on the road at the New England Patriots. It was positive news for the Jets with DJ Reed and Michael Carter back at practice. DJ Reed does not have an injury designation anymore. Michael Carter was back in a limited fashion. I thought the Devontae Adams commentary about how he, in his first game in the locker room, called the team out with a speech post-game criticizing the energy. What a power move that is, to come into the locker room and do that 24 hours after arriving and not really contributing in the first game. Now, I mean, anything is a positive, I guess, in that Jets locker room. Certainly sounds a lot different in terms of what's being said about this team the last 18 hours than what it did the first 48 hours of the week, but that's neither here nor there. As you're looking at this game, I'm curious to see what's going on with Duggar and Mapu in the defensive backfield for the Pats, along with Jonathan Jones. They popped up on the injury report. I'm curious to see if they're going to be out there. Everything about this game, despite it being a divisional rematch, kind of leans me towards the over, but this number continues to creep down as we're as low as 40.5 on the total. We're getting near to where we were in the first meeting between these two teams, which closed 39.5. With Drake May starting for the Pats, the Jets offense probably upgraded, coming off of a pretty dark 4 games in schedule for opposing defenses they faced. Unless you're really believing the Mayo commentary about calling his defense soft gets a response, I have a hard time getting to close to the same number in the first game with the changes the two teams have in this meeting from the first meeting. So curious to see how low this total continues to drop down. Buffalo on the road at Seattle. Bills, 3-point favorites across the board, total 47. I think it's right. I've thought it's right the whole week. I don't see a lot here for Seattle. DK Metcalf did not practice yesterday. He will not practice today. I think that's pretty damning for what we see from him on Sunday. I'm reading Twitter doctor threads, going back and forth with some guys. It just doesn't sound like it's a positive spot for him, as tough as he is. And if he is out there, I certainly think there is some limitations, and that's just a tough matchup against these Bills corners. Keep an eye on the Seahawks secondary. They were missing guys last week. Still watching for Reek Woolen, Julian Love, and Trey Brown. Potential concerns there with those guys banged up. New Orleans on the road at the LA Chargers. LA still a 7.5-point favorite, but it's very soft as the Saints get great injury news. Would expect this to come back down and trend back down towards 7. I'm looking at this total at 40.5. It is that max versus min rest spot, which flies over. We talked about that a lot. But injury news here. Alvin Kamara has a broken right hand. He's playing through it. He's going to be out there. We're watching for Lucas Patrick and Cesar Ruiz, who are projected to return. It is going to be Spencer Rattler, despite a bit of a hip injury, starting at quarterback, and Chris Olave, along with Taysom Hill, should both be back too. So this is going to be a much different looking Saints team than what we saw Thursday night against the Denver Broncos. Philadelphia on the road at Cincinnati. I think this is another game that's probably going to be a tough one to get a lot of movement back and forth, because there's such a strong connection to the market with both teams playing the same opponent the last 2 weeks, and this closing line being right in line with that. I will be curious to see if there's some over money into the market. Hasn't been any yet, but just based on how those opposing defenses and offenses have throttled teams for the over, maybe that's enough to get a bite, although this is a very high total at 48. Kansas City on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Didn't see a lot of movement off the Hopkins addition. He did not practice yesterday. Could see him on the practice field today. Kansas City has been a notoriously difficult offense for a wide receiver to break into, especially when it happens in season. There's a reason they don't add a lot of guys. This was certainly a desperation move, and how it looks, it was a relatively smart move that I like, but I'm curious to see if there's a bit of a delayed impact. Now, this sounds crazy for those of you who listen to me for a long time. I've started doing a lot of TikTok live streams over on the RAS Picks account. And what I do is just go live and answer questions. I'm not presenting anything different from the pod or the live stream preview that I do, but I'm just like, ask me anything about betting and I'll answer it. And there were so many questions from fantasy players that's like, should I start Hopkins? Should I start Hopkins? Lots of Hopkins versus Lamb. I'm not going the fantasy direction. But I'm curious about the uproar of Hopkins being traded and just thinking there's going to be an immediate impact. I get, on one hand, the Chiefs don't have anyone reliable to throw to consistently, but Hopkins would be the exception in the Reid tenure in Kansas City, where you have a wide receiver that's acquired and breaks through. I think the other guy you could say has been the best example of that is probably Kadarius Toney. And that, look how successful that turned out. Not saying Hopkins is going to turn into Toney, but it's really, really hard to get involved in this offense. To do so on a short week, I don't know. It seems tough to me, is how I look at it. Carolina on the road at the Denver Broncos. Broncos a 10-point favorite. Underdogs of 4 points or more off of a 35-point loss the week prior have gone 48, 18, and 2 the last 20 years, 72%. Any underdog of any amount coming off a 35-plus point loss the week prior has covered the point spread 67% of the time since 1989. There was a good write-up by Travis, another member at Right Angle Sports, one of the most respected bettors in the space, over at bettingtalk.com. And he was talking about how there are certain trends that he values because it tends to be a trend that is under certain market conditions. And his belief is that the market is more backwards looking and it captures the massive loss into future lines more so than it should with how big of a regression league the NFL is. And as we talked about yesterday on the podcast, when you're looking at this game, Sean Payton with the Broncos in his short time there has never laid more than 3.5. On the look ahead, this was Denver 4.5. We are now out to -10. It is a massive number to lay for an offense who has been the worst in football so far through 7 weeks in neutral game states. Now, the wrench that gets thrown into all of this is that Bryce Young is going to be starting for the Carolina Panthers. The Andy Dalton car accident did have an impact, which is a sprained thumb. He is not dressed at practice, and it was Bryce Young and Jack Plummer splitting reps in practice, with Young getting the lion's share of number ones, and he is in line to start for the Panthers. The YouTube comments so far on the live stream have been about how you cannot bet Carolina, how the Panthers are dead. Over on the Betting Talk forum, there has been commentary about getting off of the over, backing Detroit or Denver because it's such a big downgrade from Andy Dalton. Like, I get it. I'm not advocating to run in and back Carolina, but like, how in the world can you get comfortable laying 10 with Denver? Again, I'm not trying to angle for a side here, but like, my goodness. This is just a monster number that you're looking at. But again, Bryce Young might be Deshaun Watson level of bad, and that 750th or worse quarterback rating since we've seen from 2000 to now in that category. He could fit into that mold, certainly. Interesting. Now, in regards to our total and our release at 41.5, we saw this number crash from 43.5 down to 41.5. Just going behind the scenes, as soon as the Bryce Young news was sent out, I immediately in the urgent channel was like, are we getting off the over? There was debate about it. We were going back and forth about it. There was a commentary and a comment that was centered around how bad Andy Dalton has been in the last couple of weeks, especially last week against a very bad defense, and how this reset of a reset might not be terrible when you're getting this many points in a game and the expectations are this low with a total that is so short. And so we decided not to get off of the over, and we are going to hold that position with Bryce Young on the road against the Denver Broncos. What in the world could go wrong with that? But we're holding the total, and we are going forward with that, expecting that Bryce Young shows a little bit of something to get the Panthers to 14 or 17 points. That's what's needed here with this total. And that's the hope and the expectation that we have for him. Dallas, San Francisco, down to a flat 4, trending slightly lower. We're seeing -108s start to show. There was a comment that Deebo Samuel was better than expected, but then I'm also contrasting that with commentary where when you have fluid in your lungs, which was confirmed, that's typically a 2 to 3 week recovery, and they have the bye next week. So even if he is rushed back, there seems like there would be limitations in a big way on just stamina in general, dealing with that type of ailment. So I think Samuel's perhaps getting presented in the wrong light. Juwan Jennings and George Kittle seem more likely to play, but it's a question mark with both of them. For Dallas, the word is that Micah Parsons is a true game-time decision. We saw that Deron Bland has a chance to come back in this game as well. There's too many injuries to really make a good decision in this game. I'm waiting this one out. I hope we have better confirmation tomorrow because I do have an opinion in this game. But I'm waiting to see what we get to and what we settle at. And it's the New York Giants on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Giants 6.5-point underdogs. This was another side that I gave out on the live stream preview yesterday. I think we see the Giants keep it within a number that Mike Tomlin, since Ben Roethlisberger has retired, has never laid, nor has he never covered, and won outright in any game where the Steelers have laid more than 4 points. I think this is a pretty big bump up for the Pittsburgh Steelers, something that I've hinted at for the entire week. And so I talked about how I bet the Giants plus 6.5 as a side yesterday on the live stream and had a big breakdown. If you want to listen to that live stream, you can head over to the live stream preview on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube already this morning, good to have you watching on the video feed. Would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe or like button and leave a comment. I love answering the comments. I love chatting with everybody. There's been a ton of comments coming in lately. It's been great to chat with everybody, answer questions, and just hear thoughts about the games as well. So I always love anytime I see the comments come in. One weather report wrap-up before we let you go this morning. Cardinals-Dolphins, minimal wind, nothing substantial over 20 miles per hour. That's looking at the first report we get from multiple models. Same thing with Jets-Pats, nothing over 20 miles per hour. Looks fine. Bills-Seahawks, 70% chance of rain down in Seattle, 10 to 15 mile per hour winds. And then in Jacksonville hosting Green Bay, 15 miles sustained, 23 mile per hour gusts. And that is one model where another one is saying 5 to 10 miles per hour with 10 to 15 mile per hour gusts. And so multiple models suggesting the wind is a little bit lower than the main forecast, which usually is an indication you see those wind speeds come down. So we don't really have a true weather game on the board. So in terms of looking at sides and totals, you're looking at a pretty clean week outside of Bills, Seattle, and then potentially a little bit of wind in Jacksonville to consider in your cards based on early reports from multiple weather models. That will do it for me today. Have a fantastic Thursday, everybody. We'll talk with you bright and early tomorrow morning to wrap up the week on Friday.